Forsberg pulls up for three, boom, knocks it down.
Curry from the corner at three, puts it in. For overtime, makes it Garrett. Right.
Welcome to the MVP cast from me, Mark Woods. My guest is someone who ended the season on a big high last weekend, a winner's medal from the WBBL Trophy with Leicester Riders in that epic final with Durham. She's been GB International. She spent a lot of time in the States, and I'm glad she's joining us here. Christina Gaskin, thanks for joining the MVP cast.
Thank you very much for having me.
You have a fascinating and very illuminating blog, and if anyone wants to read it, it's at christinagaskin.squarespace.com. And one of the headlines that you had on it, and you said yourself, I guess half joking but maybe not entirely, that a clickbait headline on it, where you said that college basketball nearly killed me. Now you went to Fordham, which for people who don't know is a university in New York City. But your experience, I mean, you grew up like lots of young British basketballers with this amazing, this dream, this American dream of going to college in America. Before we talk about what happened when you got there, talk about the journey that you got. I mean, how many years had you thought about, this is what I want to do with my life, before you made it happen?
So interestingly enough, I actually was, I was born in England, but I was raised in America. I spent a lot of younger years in Detroit, Michigan. And so getting back to America before basketball came on the scene was always something that I wanted to do. I felt like it was almost my home country, although I wasn't born there. And so after starting to play basketball around 12 years old, when I moved into secondary school over here, it was only then that I sort of started to realize the opportunity of going to the States. And I would say even at that age, it was still fairly new and few and far between for British athletes to obtain scholarships to go to the States. And by the time I was doing my A-levels and studying with Barking Abbey and playing in the WBBL team there, still there wasn't anyone that had gone to the States, graduated and returned back to the UK. So there was still a lot of naivety around exactly what it entailed, the experience as a whole, and also the recruiting process. And so we were fairly ignorant to some degree. But to go back to your question in terms of my pathway into basketball, I started playing when I was 12, like I said. At the age of 14, I played under 16 national team. That was probably my earliest accolade. And then went all the way through the junior ranks, playing national team at various age groups. I tore my ACL, unfortunately, quite young. So that was a bit of a hurdle for me to get over before college. But then at the European Championships, like a lot of other elite athletes that playing today, I got recruited by several schools. And I probably narrowed it down to 10 or 12 schools that I was interested in, and then sort of started going through some selection criteria in terms of, you know, where would I like to go? What sort of schools stand out for me? And then I took it from there, really, and worked with the colleges that I had the coaches I had at the time, to narrow down the process and understand what would be the best fit for me. And then, like most other athletes, I went on 3 recruiting visits and took in as much information as possible, and then tried to make a decision.
And why Fordham? What attracted you there and made that the choice?
So I narrowed it down between Fordham University, which is in New York, and we played in the A10 conference, and Long Beach State in California. And actually at the time, Ella Clark was playing at Long Beach. And so I was very enticed to go there. And obviously, who doesn't want to be in California of all places? But when it came down to actually weighing up the decision, having already gone through a serious knee injury, I was very acutely aware that academics also played a massive part in my decision. And Fordham is considered just below Ivy League in terms of the level of education. So a lot of people that don't get into Ivy League schools will actually end up at Fordham. So it's very competitive. And I knew that if anything was to happen again and I was to pick up another serious injury, I wanted to know that I was setting myself up, not just basketball wise, but academically to have the best experience possible. So that's really what convinced me to sort of sway my decision to Fordham in particular.
So you get there And obviously that's the environment you've worked hard to get this offer and this scholarship, etc. Initially, did it go okay, or was there a point in time where it started to go sour?
So when I arrived as a freshman, it was a very interesting situation because my coach was new that year. I was actually recruited to another school that she was coaching at, and then when she transferred to Fordham, she then recruited me there as well. And so it was her first year with the program. I think previously the previous at least the previous year, I think they went one and however many games they played. I think they only won one game on the season. And so it was an interesting situation because I was recruited with 8 other freshmen. We had a really big freshman class, and of which the coach only recruited 2 of us. So the old coach that had left had recruited the 6 players. And immediately upon coming into the program, one of the first things my coach said to me when my parents were actually still there, and I was just settling into campus, was, yeah, I'm going to get rid of the other 6 players. I don't really, I don't want them here. I don't think that they're Division 1 athletes. I'm just going to slowly get rid of them as the year goes on. And that kind of was the first indication to me that perhaps she wasn't who I thought she was in terms of a coach. And it's something that stuck with me. But during the course of my freshman year, my first year, I actually played a lot for a freshman. I started quite a few games and was playing 25 plus minutes, which is quite unusual. But I realized very quickly going into my sophomore year, after my coach achieved what she said she was in terms of removing certain people from the program and recruiting other people that she wanted to play, her attitude and behavior towards me changed very dramatically.
Did you, I mean, at that age, we're 18, 19, I mean, you're obviously college coaches have a huge amount of power, influence, and you're like any basketball coach, you're beholden to them for minutes. I mean, did you feel in any situation at that point? We talk now about duty of care, and there's the idea of whistleblowing, etc. But did you feel in any way there was a place for you to go to, I guess, receive support or to have someone essentially to talk to and say, is this okay? Can you examine my environment and be satisfied that this is satisfactory?
So I think the trouble is it's twofold. The first issue that I ran into was we were so heavily manipulated on a weekly and daily basis, in the sense that if anyone started to seem in any way disappointed, frustrated, or lacked the motivation to complete what was asked of us from the coaches, or we felt like we were being pushed too hard, our scholarship was constantly held over our heads, in the sense that regularly we would get told, if you don't want to be here, then that's fine, because I have 1,000 other people that would love to be in your position right now. So if you did have any doubts about whether you were being treated fairly, they were quickly erased by the fear that you would lose your scholarship. Because you have to, appreciate that from my perspective, this is something I've wanted since I was a very young teenager. And this was the last dream that I had in terms of basketball. This is my ultimate goal. And I didn't have a future of basketball after this point. And so for me to consider speaking up and then potentially losing my scholarship, it wasn't warranted enough for me. And then I think as I did get older and more mature throughout my time in the States, there were opportunities and moments where I would stand up for myself, not only to the coach, but to other people that surrounded the program. But there were only repercussions that came with that. For example, the athletic director, who you would normally go to speak to about these kind of issues. And at the end of the year, they do surveys to each athletic program, asking for a review on the year, and you sort of rank your coaches and the staff and the program on different dimensions. And there's opportunity for open-ended responses as well. And I think perhaps after my sophomore year, it may have been my junior year as well, but I was very colorful with my responses about exactly what had happened that year and how I'd been treated, and a few injuries that I'd gone through, and how people had concussions and were expected to come back sooner than what the concussion protocol told them, and a whole host of different examples and experiences. And that survey is meant to remain confidential, but obviously in the ways in which I answered it, it became very clear that it was me that answered that in that way. And as a result, I was called into the office by my head coach and sat down and, very directly questioned on some of my responses and intimidated in a way to sort of suggest, like, this is not okay, you can't speak like this. So yes, in an ideal world, there are meant to be places that you can go and people that you can go and speak to, but unfortunately there's like a lot of corruption, even when it comes down to the physios and injuries. I think this is one of my biggest struggles, and not just for myself but for other athletes that were on my team. If we had an injury, you would expect that your physio was the one that would protect you. If you weren't ready to go back on court and your injury meant that, like, you would be in pain or you wouldn't be able to perform in a way that was expected of you, you would expect that your physio would be able to tell your coach, like, no, we're still a week out from her being able to perform. But because the way that it was structured, at least at my school, and I think from what I'm hearing from other people at a lot of schools, the head coach sort of runs the top of the program, and the physio and their assistant coaches and academic advisors and everyone else sits below them in terms of the ranking and level of importance. And so if a head coach is putting pressure onto a physio for certain people to be back in practice earlier than they should, then the physio wants to appease the coach. And so more often than not, you'd have people training that weren't ready to train and sort of doing permanent damage to their bodies. I know people that have since graduated and tried to go and play pro, and they're still dealing with some of the injuries that, who knows, if they had have dealt with them more adequately in college and been protected, then maybe their bodies would have been able to play a little bit longer in terms of their professional careers. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that I don't think you can understand from phone calls, emails, and, a 3-day recruiting visit.
I mean, one of the things that intrigued me that you wrote about was, and as you've just said, was that coach's reaction. But this wasn't just a one-off. This was something that could happen on day to day in practice. And it seemed to be, in your words, there was a call for an attitude adjustment if they felt that you needed that. What form did that take?
So attitude adjustment, and I mean, even you saying it now kind of makes me feel some kind of physical response, just because it was that brutal. But essentially, we had a rule in our team. We had, like many teams that I played on, and not too dissimilar to teams that I played on before I got to the States, in terms of, especially with national team and at the elite level, we were expected not to go out 24 hours before a game, and not to go out 48 hours before a game and 24 hours before a practice. And so often, we rarely ever had 2 days off in a row. So we really didn't get the opportunity to go out and socialize and live a normal college life like people probably would over here. But if people were to break certain rules, and for an example, with my coach, it would be as simple as not bringing your training reversible to a road game, and instead having to wear a Fordham t-shirt of the right color, but just, you'd forgotten your uniform. You hadn't, and we're not talking about playing uniform, we're talking about practice uniform. And I remember one day we was due to leave for a road trip, and fortunately enough, we had cleaners that did our washing for us, and we'd put our laundry, all of our basketball and sports related clothes, on a loop that would be washed overnight and returned to us the next morning into our locker room. And so I headed over to the locker room like I always do before we head away for a road trip, and I was picking up everything I needed and noticed that I didn't have my practice jerseys. And we ran out of time, so I couldn't chase up exactly where they were, and I tried to look for them as best as possible. But as soon as I got on the bus, I said to my coach, look, I put them in the wash yesterday, and they must have been misplaced because they haven't come back on my laundry loop. She nodded, didn't say a single word to me, and I sort of carried on to the back of the bus. Practice came round the next day. We were on the road, and I wore a t-shirt, like, to ensure we had 2 colors like necessary. And no comment was made, although I received a message from one of the assistants when I got back to school to say, you'll have an attitude adjustment tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. For getting your practice jersey on the road. And my coach knew full well, and I explained very clearly that I hadn't, forgotten it. I'd gone to look for it, and it hadn't been returned to me. And so attitude adjustment itself was 45 minutes worth of sprints. But ordinarily, when you're doing any kind of intense workout, you normally do 30 seconds of running, let's say, and then at least twice as much rest, depending on how intense the running is. So let's say you're doing a 10-12 second sprint, you'd probably have like 36 seconds rest before you go again. With attitude adjustment, it was 1-to-1. So if you ran for 10 to 12 seconds, you had 10 to 12 seconds before you ran again. And often people would be sick after workouts like this, or just would be physically absolutely destroyed, because it's just asking something of your body that, it's just humanly impossible to a certain degree to sustain it at least for 45 minutes. And you had certain targets. It wasn't just you run as hard as you can until your body burns out. It was like, you have to make these times for these runs, and we're doing this again and again until you pass. And with our program specifically, attitude adjustment only affected the entire team when more than 3 people had broken a team rule. So if more than 3 or 4 people had broken a team rule, then the entire team was pulled in for attitude adjustment, irrespective of, if you engaged in whatever the rule that was broken was. But it could be something as simple as not wearing the correct pair of white Nike socks. You might have worn elite socks and someone else had worn just plain white socks, and that would be considered a violation. So it was fairly militant in terms of the standards that we were expected to uphold at times.
I mean, in any other word, it's bullying. We've seen this certainly in other British sports, revelations that have come out about, scandals where, coaches have not had the right duty of care. And a lot of it at the time is based, in theory, if we can defend the indefensible for a moment, on that quest to be better and to push people to the limits, and all that kind of stuff. But also, we've I guess, become much more aware of the mental health impact of this before we even talk about the physical problems involved. For you, and obviously sometimes you realize this at the time, but sometimes or more often it's with experience afterwards, but what ways did that damage you?
I think in several ways, to be honest. And I think your point is absolutely right about you don't always realize when you're in the moment. I think college in general is very demanding as an athlete, just because I use the analogy a lot with my teammates when we were there about treading water. You never get out of the swimming pool. You're constantly treading water just to try and keep your shoulders above or to stay afloat, but you never get to get out the pool and sit and look at the pool from the outside. So, if finals were to roll around and we also had important games coming up, would quite often walk around campus and see my teammates, and I'll be like, "Where's the water today?" And they'd sort of like raise their hand towards their face as if they couldn't quite breathe. And we would joke about it, but it was a very real situation because, I think most people are aware of everything that's expected of them at college, but it doesn't matter how much. And I've tried as well to do my due diligence in terms of preparing elite athletes today that are going over, but the physical demands on your body, as well as the mental demands in terms of, just completing your schoolwork. If you were with, a great coach on a great program that does really support you and want the best for you, and mentally challenging as it is. So to add on top of that, a level of manipulation and a level of mental bullying, I guess, and pressure, it just becomes unbearable to a certain degree. And for me, I didn't really take a step back and realize how much this was affecting me until my junior year. And the back end of my junior year, I started to see a counselor on campus, actually, that was completely separate and unrelated to the basketball program. I was already speaking with a sports psychologist whom my college coach prescribed. And I actually found out after the fact that sports psychologist had regular conversations with my head coach, where my head coach would pressure him into disclosing what some of the conversations him and I were having were. So I thought I was doing a great thing, but what I was really doing was just disclosing to my coach exactly how I felt at all times. And she then began to use that against me in certain ways. So it wasn't until I was able to seek help that was exclusively separate from the basketball program that I could really have a conversation with someone and have someone sit there and tell me that no, what I'm experiencing isn't normal, and what I'm going through isn't acceptable, that I really appreciated, my current situation.
Was there a point, I mean, given that you've had 3 years of all this where it kind of bottomed out, and that's to say that you found a sort of basement at the bottom of this valley of despair that they'd seemingly plunged you into?
I think for me, it probably took longer than most people would appreciate. A lot of people say to me, well, how did you stay in that situation for so long? How did you put up with that level of stress and manipulation for so long? And I think just knowing how much I put going into it, in terms of how many years I prepared for the moment of going to play basketball in college in America, I'm too competitive to just let something go. And I think that was the constant fight that I had on a daily basis. No matter how bad each day was, I was still playing basketball and playing a sport that I loved. And it was very hard for me to face and accept that I would possibly quit. And a lot of people would say, winners never quit and quitters never win. And so I constantly reminded myself of that. And it was very difficult to accept that something that I'd planned and worked very, very hard for could potentially just come to an end if that's what I decided. And in terms of, was there a specific point? I don't know that there was any one specific point. I think I wouldn't have necessarily predicted it to end in the way that it did. I just think that a very specific situation that I sort of elaborate on a little bit more in my blog, where it was just the cherry on top for me. And I think I just realized that there was nothing more positive to come from this experience. There was no upside. And I finally realized that regardless of whether I was going to stay after games and continue to work out long after people had left and get onto the treadmill each day or run around the running track each day and just physically push my body as much as possible and work out with the assistant coaches, I think I just realized one day that it's not me, and there's no amount of hard work and commitment that's going to prove to my coach that I'm worth the opportunity. So
that cherry on top was what?
So it actually was unrelated to basketball a little bit, but there was a situation on campus where I think we had a few days off, and coach's son actually was at a gathering with us, and a lot of money was stolen at this gathering. And prior to the party or the gathering starting, we'd informed her son, that's a lot of money. You should probably put it away somewhere, me and one of my teammates, because there's going to be a lot of people coming around. You don't want to just leave that out. And he did. He put it away, and he subsequently left the apartment and went somewhere else. And then, throughout the night, a lot of people came and went. And he sort of came back maybe a few hours later and turned the lights on, turned the music off, and said, "Who's stolen my money?" And very quickly, the blame and the judgment shifted to myself and one of my teammates. And understandably, because we were the last people that sort of spoke to him or that he saw, that knew where he'd put the money, etc. But there were a lot of other people that were passing by that could have seen as well. And although, the incident itself wasn't very unusual, my coach's reaction to it wasn't acceptable. And she immediately had called me and said, "Look, Christina, this is a very serious situation. You need to explain to me what's happened, who's stolen the money, did you take it, or did my teammate take the money?" And started to slowly threaten me with, different ramifications, when clearly neither of us had taken the money. And to sort of end any sort of discussion or debate on it, I said to her son, "Look, come down to our apartment. It's just below yours. You can search our rooms and we can be done with this. I understand why you're annoyed, but let's not act hasty in this situation." And which he did. He came down and he searched my room and my teammates, and he seems fairly satisfied. But then the blame started to shift, not only from my coach, but some of my teammates started to say, did you guys steal the money? And just started to question our own behavior. And then the next day, later that evening, I got another call saying that, the coach from the head coach saying, "Well, I'm going to get the police involved. We're going to get the athletic director involved. This is a really serious situation. You need to tell us like what you know. And Christina, and I was co-captain at the time, and so she said, Christina, I want you to arrange a meeting in the film room tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. with everyone that was at the party. And I said, okay, no problem. I would always abide by what coach said. I would never question her, and I would always be as respectful as possible. And so I agreed to arrange the meeting, and I think went to sleep. And the following morning, she sent a text and said, I want everyone on the team at the meeting. I was like, okay, that's fine. I'll make sure everyone comes. And then I think earlier in that morning, I went back up to the apartment where her son was staying, and I spoke with one of his teammates and said, look, like, what's the current situation? What's going on? And he said, what do you mean? The money was found 2 hours ago. And I said, what do you mean the money was found? So why is my coach still asking for a meeting to be had between us? And so I then get a flurry of further text messages from her in which she says, was the money found before or after? Did you return to the apartment before or after I had spoken to you on the phone? I need to know your whereabouts from when the money was stolen. I need to know what you and your teammate did in terms of how many times you went back to the apartment and at what times. And I said, well, yeah, of course. We went back up to the apartment. We were trying to dilute the situation and help them find the money. If we just sat there and did nothing, then we're not exactly, the people that they would think that we were. So she's asking me all of these questions after the money had already been found. And I just started to realize that, wow, you recruited me since I was 16 years old, and you think so little of me that you think that I'm capable of stealing over $1,000 off of your son in this kind of situation. Like, to me, it just was the cherry on top in terms of like disrespect and trust. And I just said, you know what, like, I need to wash my hands with this. This has gone beyond basketball, and how can I step into a program and give my all every day for someone and be as upset as I am? And this is how she truly feels about me. Like this, it was enough for me.
I mean, when you reach that point, which clearly it's untenable to remain part of that team, etc. But how do you extricate yourself formally from that? Because it's, you're at a great college, you want the degree, you don't want to have to be jumping in a plane immediately overnight and lose everything or lose what gains you can get from the situation. So, but how do you get yourself out of that in terms of cutting the tie with the team?
So it was actually interesting. I spoke to the sports psychologist, and having known that my conversation with him, it was kind of tactical in the sense that I knew that he would then take from my conversation what he needed and translate that to the head coach. So I called him quite immediately and said, look, it's kind of urgent. I need to speak to you this morning. We have practice this afternoon, but there's something that's come up. Explained the situation to him and everything that had happened. I said, look, I'm just not happy to walk into practice without an apology. I was accused of a lot of things yesterday, and I feel very disrespected, and I don't feel comfortable just walking into practice and just brushing everything under the rug. On top of which, the teammate that was being accused, probably more heavily than me, was being done so because of her background and where she'd come from. Everyone had assumed that, she doesn't have as much money, or she comes from a certain background, and therefore, it must have been her that took the money. And to me, that was probably more hurtful than the accusations that were thrown towards me. And so I felt like myself and her were owed a big apology. And so I communicated this with the sports psychologist, and we were then called into the locker room pre-practice, and we sat down, and the head coach said, I'm sorry for how you felt last night. Not I'm sorry for how she made us feel or for any kind of accountability for her own actions. Just, I'm sorry for how you felt. And I thought, no, like that's not acceptable. And so I go down to the locker room and I get ready for practice with everyone else. And I come up the stairs, and I think my assistant coaches can tell that I'm angry, and they pull me to one side and they said, look, like, we agree with you, Christina. We understand that she acted like completely unacceptably. Like, we completely take your side on this matter, but you've got to get through practice. Let's talk about this afterwards. I said, okay. And then I was in practice, and I think I drove to the basket or made some kind of move, and the same girl that had been recruited over me my sophomore year fouled me quite quite badly, like to the extent that like I'm on the baseline, like laying on the ground after trying to go up for a layup, and no foul was called, and they call it out of bounds and start to try and go the other way. And at this point, it was for me almost a microcosm from my college experience. It didn't matter what I did; the assistant coaches wanted to appease the head coach. So if I'd done something and calling a foul for me would make her angry, then they would just leave it. And that's what they did in that moment. And I think I just had enough, and I turned around and I said, like, that's not a foul. And they looked at me like, calm down, Christina. And I was like, so I just went up for the layup, got pushed in the back, landed on the ground in front of you, and it's not a foul. And they sort of like become very uncomfortable because I've never challenged them like this before. I just sort of like absorbed it and carried on, tried to go get a stop on defense. And in hindsight, I would say I'm a little bit ashamed for how I reacted in that situation, but I had so many emotions and so much anger. And I then I got subbed out, and I spoke to one of the other assistants, and he was like, Christina, like, calm down, it's not that serious. You probably did get fouled, but like, it's okay. And I sort of just lost the plot and started ranting at him. And I think my head coach could overhear the situation. And I just said, you know what, it's not okay. And it's not been okay. And I started to sort of just go through a bit of a rant of how I felt in that current moment, to the point in which I was sent down to the locker room to calm down. No one was going to throw me out of practice because everyone knew that I was, justified almost in my behavior in that moment because of how coach had treated me the night before. But I went down to the locker room and I sat in my locker, and it's a moment that I'll probably never forget. And I think just a light bulb went off in my head, and I said, that's it. I'm done. I'm not just done with this practice. I'm done in general. And I started to pack up my locker and put everything, completely cleared it out, even took my name tag out of my locker, walked away, and got back to my apartment. And I started to think, how can I get out of this situation, but still graduate and have my degree? Because ultimately I chose to come to Fordham because it was an academic school, and I wanted to ensure that, I set myself up for the best possible future. And so I sat there and I was discussing with one of my other friends outside of basketball, and I said, look, like, I think I have a point of leverage. And I sort of had a bit of a smile on my face. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, all of this happened and she's acted very unprofessionally. However, she's in such a powerful position. And the reason as to why she's allowed to continue to behave how she is because she wins. And, college basketball in America is cutthroat. It's based on wins and losses. If you don't win as a coach, you're cut. And then someone else comes in and as tries to do as they want. And so I said, they're not going to want to get rid of her. But they're going to have to if I tell my truth or the story of at least what's happened recently, but probably more of the other events that have happened as well. And the girl responded and said, yeah, but Christina, you've tried this before, and you've tried to give feedback before to the women's athletic director, and that her relationship with the coach, and you're never going to get anywhere. And I said, well, maybe we don't involve her. Maybe we go straight to the head athletic director. We know that their relationship isn't as strong. He's new to the school, fairly new, and I think that he'll take it seriously. And she said, okay, so what's your position going to be? And I said, well, I can tell them that, if I tell them what I know and what has happened, they're going to have to launch an investigation with the coach. And if they don't want to do that, then here are my terms. And I sat there in that meeting and I listed what my terms would be, that I wanted to graduate and I wanted all of the privileges that I currently have with none of the responsibilities. I don't want to have to go to team practice. I don't want to have to travel with the team. I don't want to have to do, community service or academic advisory hours or anything that was related to the team. I didn't want any part of. As far as they are concerned, I'm not a basketball player anymore, but I want to continue to have my degree, have my classes, and all of the other benefits that come with being an athlete. He didn't even hesitate. He said, okay, Christina, that's done.
I mean, it's a horrific tale of woe from start to finish. And, obviously for someone like yourself, clearly a bright, sparky young woman going into this situation when you come out of it. And you can sit back a few years later now when you go back. What, if people are listening to this and, parents who or coaches who want to send their kids on scholarship or who maybe even have kids or former kids that have coached on that are in the States or elsewhere. I mean, for you, what should they learn? What should they understand and be wary of, look out for, be vigilant, and even possibly even for coaches, who are involved in the game, what should they learn from your story?
I think the most important thing to understand from a fundamental perspective is that growing up playing basketball in this country, you are surrounded by people that are very passionate about the game. Their number one reason for being in basketball is because they're passionate about the game. There's not a tremendous amount of money, and that's not a secret in this country. And we're constantly reminded that we're an underfunded sport and an underrepresented sport. But as soon as you step foot in America on college campuses, you become immediately aware that you're surrounded by and inundated with financial support. And so whether that means in terms of what people regularly know in terms of receiving Nike gear, 3 or 4 pairs of shoes and t-shirts and tracksuits. But what people don't realize behind the scenes is you're going from a situation where you're supported and encouraged and developed, and you're surrounded by people that are passionate and share the same passion and excitement that you do, to a situation that is business minded, from the start focused on winning at all costs. Whereas over here, yes, I was part of programs that did win and we were very successful, but they also cared about us as individuals, because at the end of the day, their job or their career or their future didn't ride off the back of solely winning. Like it didn't have the same level of cutthroat that it does in America. And so this sort of financial difference, I think, is the primary reason as to why it's so different here versus in America. And in terms of what can we do to better prepare both athletes, coaches, and parents to understand and make a more informed decision, I think we just have to ask better questions. I think like I said, when I was at Barking Abbey and looking to go to the States, no one had graduated and come back. So I asked a lot of questions, but I don't know that I was asking the correct questions, the sort of questions that a coach wouldn't be able to hide behind. And it's difficult because when you're 17 or 18, you don't necessarily even know what you should be asking. But that's why I think it's important that, whoever attends these recruiting visits or whoever's, a part of this recruiting process with you, asks the right questions or suggests to you some of the right questions to ask.
And what are those right questions?
So I think if you're being specific in terms of like playing, I think the right question would depend on whom you're asking. And so for me, one of my biggest regrets is when I went to the school to visit, not having asked the players that are currently there more questions about their current experience and how they like the coach and how does the coach deal with a certain situation. Oh, how much do you play? Oh, and how does coach behave towards you? And then ask someone else who's, considered a star of the program and leads in terms of scoring in minutes. Well, how does coach treat you? And see if there's any sort of difference, because yes, they want to pitch to you that it's this amazing program, etc. But I think we're observant enough as human beings in that if you were to ask those questions to 2 very different people within the program, you could tell by their body language and response immediately as to whether there was any kind of discrepancy. And obviously, people might feel a certain level of resentment for a multitude of reasons, but ask those questions to the players, have a lot of more in-depth conversations with the players to understand what the culture and the environment of the program that you're going into is. And then in terms of asking the coaches questions, I think you need to be very direct. I was quite shy and worried about, saying the wrong thing because I'm thinking, I want this scholarship. This is everything that I've ever wanted. And so I didn't want to come across in any way negatively. But what you have to realize is that you're an asset to them and you should be an asset to them. And they want you just as much as you want them. And if they don't, then there's probably an issue there. And so don't feel intimidated to ask questions such as, how do you see me fitting into your program? And how exactly do you think that I will evolve throughout my 4 years as an athlete on your program. What do you see some of my strengths and weaknesses are? Because if I had have asked those questions to my coach, I probably would have realized that she sees me as a 5 that rebounds and wants to post up and set screens and be an out and out 5, when all throughout my career I was a stretch 4. And so if I don't fit into her program in the way that I fit into other programs in the past, and if my advantages aren't something that she recognizes and wants in a player, then that's an issue right away. And you should be able to tell that. And also, I think something else that you can do is watch game footage, watch how the current style of play is, watch how the coach responds. If you're lucky enough to see a game, watch how they respond and how they talk to the athletes. There's just a lot more that we can do that can give you a better indication. And we're never going to be 100% correct. You have to take a gamble, and you're going to have to make a decision one way or the other. But I think the second part of all of this is having the right support. And that's something that I'm really passionate about now. And I would say that anyone that's listening to this, if you want to reach out to me and ask for advice, if you're a current athlete in the States or you're looking to go to the States, I'm always a resource and someone that will absolutely listen.
You finish at Fordham. On a scale of 1 to 10, how done are you with basketball?
12.
So you're working in New York, and you still got your visa, so you might as well make the most of it. Why not? Everyone wants to spend a bit of time in the Big Apple, but what gets you? What's the little nibble that tempts you back into playing basketball again?
It's hard to say specifically. I just think when you go from being an athlete, that's like a big part of your identity. You grow up and you're Christina, the girl that plays basketball. Oh, the basketball player, or, if you've got siblings in the game, you're the brother or sister of someone else that plays. And it's a big part of who you are. And as much as I thoroughly enjoyed working and living in New York, I still felt like I lost a part of myself when I gave up playing basketball. And I was fortunate enough, actually, during my college experience to come back and train with the senior women, with Damian Jennings at the time. And I think for me, I realized in that short, sort of summer camp experience that actually, how I feel right now towards basketball is just a result of the experience that I've gone through. It's not actually how I feel about the game. And I feel like there is still some love there somewhere. It just needs to be reignited in the right way. And returning to London and starting to work in London, I realized, we have a long time to work and to work a 9 to 5 and to lead what I would call a regular life outside of basketball. And I just wanted to maximize the opportunity to be able to play as long as possible. So that's, I think, what led me to join London Lions, to be back at Barking Abbey. And then I took a pro contract after 2 years, and I played in Italy last year, which really solidified for me that, I do love the game and I will try and play as long as possible.
What's that sort of contrast like? Because, you've had this hideous period of time where basketball's a chore, and it's the negativity that psychologically that surrounds basketball builds up. And then you get to go and play in Italy in a place called Marghera Giants, or a team called Marghera Giants. And, it's a beautiful country, not a bad place to spend 6 months of the year. Describe the contrast between what you did have and the fun part of what you have last year.
So, I mean, it was night and day for me. And it was interesting because I guess I never assumed that I would, after college, especially how college went, that I would ever receive a pro contract to go and play. And I was very grateful that I was contacted by an agent that worked very hard for me to find a good fit. And I guess in my mind, I always thought that playing professionally would be harder than college, just because, you're considered a professional now. You're no longer an amateur. You're paid to play the game. And so therefore, surely you're going to be held to a higher standard, and you're going to have more expectations on you than you would have when you were at college. And for me, that wasn't the case. When I went to Italy, it was a wonderful experience. I played both just outside of Rome, and then, like you said, in Venice towards the end of the year. And yes, it was a professional environment. Yes, there were a lot of expectations on me in terms of performance as one of the import players. But there was a certain enjoyment to the game. You know, you were allowed to laugh in practice when it was appropriate. You were allowed to like have fun with the girls. Like you weren't expected to, you know, sprint and be working out for 3.5 hours of team practice a day and to come in and do weights and to come in, you know, and do all these additional workouts. Like you became in control of your own process in terms of your own personal success and development. Whereas in college, every aspect of what you did was scheduled and controlled for you. So it's, in a way, it's like the level of freedom and independence allowed me just to step on the basketball court and enjoy the game again, not to think about, you know, how I was going to be treated as a result, or, you know, how was I going to, you know, be able to schedule this class to be able to coordinate with this practice, and how was I going to deal with this mentally, deal with this situation. Everyone just wanted you to succeed as much as possible. And when you're playing in a pro environment, best case scenario, they do as much as they can to ensure that's the case. So for me, it was a breath of fresh air. And especially being in Italy, it's a beautiful country with wonderful people. I'm just sad right now that, you know, they're experiencing what they are, because it's a really wonderful culture. And I would, for anyone that's coming out of college and considering, you know, where they want to go and play pro, I would definitely look into Italy. It's a great experience.
Great food, and what you can't really go
wonderful
wrong.
Food. Yeah, wonderful food.
I mean, you come back here, and obviously you're doing your masters in marketing at Loughborough alongside playing for Leicester this season. Let's talk about Leicester first. I mean, you have obviously the great victory in the trophy final. You guys could have possibly won the league. We will never know that it's been cancelled. But did last weekend in Glasgow, did that feel like a satisfactory ending for you guys? Need to pick up a medal, or does it still feel like there was something left on the table there, albeit under the circumstances we all find ourselves just now?
Well, I think any basketball player, or, you know, more generally speaking, any athlete right now would say that they would have unfinished business. But I like to reflect and say that we're very, very fortunate in the sense that we had the opportunity to be in a final at this stage in the year, and to, you know, coincidentally be able to play that final right before the season was suspended or ended the very next week. So I'm very grateful for that experience. I know that it does still feel very strange, but I would say it feels less strange for us having had the opportunity to compete in a final than it does for other teams around the league who are just, you know, competing towards playoffs and then suddenly told, actually, no, everything's finished. So
did it feel like for you like that was the right decision to go ahead with the final? Because obviously lots of people have gone back and forth on this.
So there was a lot of controversy around whether the game should be played or not. We went into a meeting on Friday before the game, in which Jesper sort of sat us down and had a very serious talk and said, look, and I don't think any of us in the room fully appreciated the situation until he had this conversation with us. And he said, look, a lot of leagues around the world, and I've had a lot of phone calls from players and coaches today, are being shut down and they will not play in any more games come Monday. We're in a very rare situation where our game is due to go ahead right now, and we have the opportunity to be in a final, something that we've, you know, prepared for since the beginning of the year. And, you know, if that final does go ahead, I just want you guys to have in your mind that this will be probably the very last go around for this team together this year. And so for me, that sort of, I would be wrong to say that I didn't want to play in the final, because I did. I'm a competitor, and although I was aware of the risks and the sort of the current situation with the coronavirus, I wanted to go out of the season on a high. And so selfishly, like, I wanted to play, and unless someone told me, whether that be scientists or a government official or someone with the sort of necessary experience, that it wasn't safe to play and that we were putting ourselves and other people at risk, then I was prepared to do that. Because I think at the moment, a lot of people are speaking on a topic that they don't fully understand. And we're listening to the media, and we're listening to what some of the stats are saying. But we can only trust that scientists and the people that fully understand, you know, virus control and how to deal with this situation are making the right decisions for us. And I don't think that I'm someone that can sit here and speculate as to whether the final should or shouldn't have gone ahead, because I don't have the necessary like qualifications or understanding to understand the risk, if that makes sense.
At least it was a great final to bring
Yeah,
down the season, to down the curtain on the season.
absolutely.
Just a few things before we let you go. GB, you've had a little taste of it. Is that something that's still very much part of the ambitions?
I think post the Commonwealth, I really trained hard for the Commonwealth Games, and I'm not shy to say that that was a goal of mine, and I fell short. So I put a lot of time into trying to make that a reality. And so after that, mentally, it's not something that I would never want to say I don't want to play national team. I think it's always has been and always will be an honor for me to be called up to play national team. But just knowing how much effort and commitment I put into trying to make the Commonwealth Games team, I've sort of said to myself now, focus on your own game, focus on your own development, and what you can do to improve yourself. And if national team becomes a part of that, then great. But if it doesn't, then that's also okay. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And you've got the Masters in marketing that you're finishing off at Loughborough. What are you going to do with it? What's the plan?
So I actually do marketing consulting as well on the side. So I have various clients across different industries, and it works quite well for me because it allows me to fit it in flexibly around everything else in terms of training, school, and any other sort of ambitions that I have. But I'm also quite passionate about this topic, and I'm working a little bit with Basketball England right now to put together some kind of educational resource for elite athletes that are on the pathway to go to the States, and to be able to advise parents, coaches, and the athletes themselves as to exactly what it entails and how they can be best prepared.
And do you see that as as something that you, obviously alongside the company work that you've done, but do you see that there's something that I guess British basketball in general needs to be better at in terms of joining up the thinking between development, between progress, whether it's college or whether it's staying here or whether it's going into Europe, whether it's playing professionally, where it's the way it sells itself? I mean, sitting back with all these varied experiences that you've got, where's the next leap in this sport going to be, taking in some of those things that you've been through?
I just think that we need to fill the gaps in terms of where some of the ignorance lies. I think a lot of people are fully aware, and year on year, we still continue to send a lot of athletes to the States. And I'm not going to sit here and say that's not a wonderful thing and a great opportunity. I mean, my scholarship was worth over $250,000. So it was a great opportunity for me. But I think that we do have a responsibility as a larger governing body and institution to educate elite athletes better. And I think one of the things that's really missing right now as well is we need to challenge the idea that the American dream is the only dream that an athlete should have at the age of 14, 16, looking to continue their basketball career. Because there are plenty of athletes like take Carl Wheatle. He didn't go to college in the States, and he went straight to play professionally in Italy and has had a great career and continues to do very well. But unfortunately, it feels like not going to college or looking at other pathways, staying in this country or, going to Europe are secondary to getting to America. And I think what I'm seeing more and more recently, which is a little sad, is that people want to get to America at all costs. And whereas, back when, I think Lloyd Gardner used to say to me, look, if you're good enough, they'll find you. If you're good enough as a player, they will recruit you and you will be contacted. You don't need to do so much in terms of sending out highlight tapes and sending out film tapes. And quite often, sometimes, I feel like people try and get to America at all costs and accept scholarships to be in situations that are far from ideal. And then they end up returning 1 or 2 years later, having not completed their degree, to then go to a university over here. And have we done them a disservice as an organization and as a basketball community by, has someone had a conversation with them and at some point and said, maybe going to America is not the best opportunity for you. Maybe, you're not someone that wants to study academically. So therefore, why would we put you in that environment? Perhaps going and playing pro and taking some online courses and educating yourself in a different way would be a better option. There are people that that are great at that and that do have the right conversations. Namely, I know from my experience, Lloyd and James at Barkin. But I think we need more people to have those discussions, and I think they need to be coming from British basketball and England basketball as a whole, and not just be left to people's parents and people's coaches that may or may not have the answers or have the experience to know exactly what they're talking about.
Well, lots of people, I think, will have learned plenty from hearing your experiences, the good, the bad, and quite the ugly at certain points in time. If you want to reach out to Christina, as she has said, she is on Twitter at Christina Gaskin. Her blog's at christinagaskin.squarespace.com. Christina, wish you well in these times of trauma and whatever isolation that you need to do, and continued good luck with your career on and off the court. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
That's it for this edition of the MVP Cast. You can get all our editions via our website at mvp247.com or your favourite podcast provider. Another edition coming very soon. But from me, Mark Woods, it's bye for now.